At my son's Thanksgiving dinner, the receptionist did not know who I was. My son Bradley seated me at table 12 right by the bathrooms. My name card did not say Dad. It said Guest. His in-laws got the head table laughing and drinking champagne. I had given him $340,000 to build his law firm. He said I was supposed to help him because that is what fathers do. I looked at that cheap handwritten card, and I made one call to my lawyer. Before I continue this story, let me know where you are watching from in the comments below. Hit like and subscribe if you have ever had to stand up to family who underestimated your worth. I adjusted my tie in the reflection of the Ritz-Carlton glass doors. I am 72 years old, and I have worn the same charcoal suit for special occasions for the last decade. It is a good suit, durable. It does not shout money like the Italian silk suits my son Bradley wears, but it commands respect, or so I thought. I had arrived 15 minutes early because punctuality is the backbone of any successful business. I made my money in logistics, trucks, warehouses, sweat and diesel. I know that if you are 5 minutes early, you are 10 minutes late. I walked up to the reception podium. The girl behind the counter could not have been older than 25. She was scrolling on her phone and barely looked up. "Welcome to the Sterling and Wentworth Thanksgiving Gala," she said without making eye contact. "Name, please." "Douglas Sterling," I said. My voice was calm, but I felt a tighten in my chest. The sign above her head said, Sterling in gold letters. My last name. The name that paid for this entire evening. She ran a manicured finger down the printed guest list. I waited for her to smile. I waited for her to say, "Oh, Mr. Sterling, right this way to the head table." "I do not see a Douglas Sterling on the VIP list," she said, frowning. "Are you sure you were invited?" I gripped the edge of the mahogany podium. "I am Bradley Sterling's father," I said. "I paid the $50,000 deposit for this ballroom." "Oh, right," she said, as if I had just reminded her to take out the trash. She reached under the counter and pulled out a small box of blank cards. She did not hand me a pre-printed gold-embossed place card like the ones stacked neatly on her left. She took a black marker and scribbled guest on a blank white card. She pointed toward the back of the room. "You are at table 12. It is through the main aisle past the dance floor and to the left." I took the card. The ink was still wet. Guest. Not father, not dad, not even Douglas. Just guest. I walked into the ballroom. It was magnificent. Crystal chandeliers, velvet drapes, the smell of expensive roasted turkey and truffle oil filled the air. But as I walked deeper into the room, the atmosphere changed. I passed table 1. That was the head table. It was set on a raised platform. I saw them. The Wentworths. Courtney, my daughter-in-law, was laughing with her parents. Her father was smoking a cigar that cost more than my weekly grocery bill. They had the best view of the Boston Harbor. I passed table 5. That was where Bradley's law partners sat. They were clinking crystal glasses and checking their Rolex watches. They looked important. They looked expensive. I kept walking, past the music, past the warmth, past the laughter. I reached the far back corner of the room. Table 12 was a small, round folding table that wobbled when I touched it. It was pushed up against the swinging double doors of the kitchen. Every time a waiter walked out, a blast of hot steam and the smell of dishwater hit me. But that was not the worst part. To my right, less than 5 feet away, was the door to the men's restroom. The door was propped open slightly to air it out. The smell of industrial bleach and urinal cakes mixed with the aroma of the expensive dinner I had paid for. There were no flowers on my table, no crystal glasses, just standard water tumblers and paper napkins. I looked at the empty chairs at my table. There were only 4 settings. I pulled out my chair and sat down. The swinging kitchen door bumped the back of my chair. A waiter rushed past carrying a tray of dirty plates. He scraped a half-eaten lobster tail into a bin right next to my ear. "Excuse me," I said. He did not hear me, or he did not care. I looked down at the white card in my hand. Guest. I placed it on the empty plate. My hands were shaking. Not from age, not from cold, but from a rage so cold it felt like ice in my veins. I had spent 40 years building a legacy. I had spent $340,000 launching my son's career so he could stand in a room like this. And this was my return on investment. A seat by the toilet. I took a sip of the lukewarm tap water in my glass. I did not scream. I did not make a scene yet. I just watched the Wentworths at table 1 enjoying the wine I bought. I took my phone out of my pocket. It was an older model, but it made calls just fine. I scrolled to M in my contacts. Mitchell Ross, my lawyer, my shark. I stared at the phone screen. One call. That was all it would take to turn the lights off on this entire party. One call to activate the poison pill clause in the loan agreement I had made Bradley sign 5 years ago. He thought it was a formality. He thought his old man was just being bureaucratic. He was about to learn that in business and in family, you never bite the hand that feeds you unless you want to starve. I watched my son Bradley navigate through the crowded ballroom. He moved with the practiced ease of a man who believes he owns the room. He was wearing a midnight blue Italian suit that fit him perfectly. A suit that likely cost more than the truck I drove to get here. I stood up expecting a hug. I expected a handshake. I expected some sign of affection after not seeing him for 3 months. Instead, Bradley stopped 2 feet away from me. He did not smile. He reached out and grabbed the knot of my tie. He jerked it to the left, then to the right, tightening it until it was uncomfortable. "You look a mess, Dad," he said. His voice was low and tight. "You could have at least bought a new shirt. The collar on this one is frayed." I pulled away from his grip. "I am fine, Bradley," I said. "Why am I sitting next to the latrine?" Bradley looked around nervously, checking to see if anyone was watching us. He forced a smile that did not reach his eyes. "It is not the latrine, Dad. It is a private table. I put you here so you would be comfortable. You know you do not like loud crowds." I looked at table 1 where the Wentworths were holding court like royalty. They were loud. They were the center of attention. "The Wentworths seem to be enjoying the crowd," I said. "Why are they at the head table while the man who paid the deposit for this room is sitting with the busboys?" Bradley sighed, the kind of sigh a parent gives a petulant child. He stepped closer, invading my personal space. "Look, Dad, the Wentworths are important clients. Mr. Wentworth introduces me to investors. Mrs. Wentworth knows everyone in the city council. We need to give them the space to shine. It is about optics. You sitting up there with your rough edges. It does not fit the brand we are trying to build tonight." Rough edges. The words hung in the air between us. I looked my son in the eye. "Those rough edges built your life, Bradley. Those rough edges signed a check for $340,000 to open your firm last year. You told me you needed capital. You told me you would make me a partner. Now I am a hidden guest." Bradley scoffed. He actually rolled his eyes. "Oh my God, are you going to bring that up again?" "That money was not a loan, Dad. It was an investment in your legacy. You are supposed to help me. That is what fathers do. They sacrifice so their children can be better than them. Stop acting like a loan shark and start acting like a supportive parent." He checked his Rolex. I have to go. Courtney is waiting for me to make the toast. Just stay here, eat your dinner, and try not to talk to too many people. The investors at table 5 do not need to hear your old war stories about the trucking business." He turned his back on me without waiting for a response. He walked away toward the light and the applause, leaving me in the shadows. I looked at the $340,000 investment walking away from me. I realized then that I had not raised a son. I had raised a parasite. And parasites only stop feeding when you cut off the supply. I sat back down in the wobbly chair. The waiter placed a bread roll on my plate. It was cold. I took my phone out again. I looked at the number for my lawyer, Mitchell Ross. Bradley thought the $340,000 was a gift. He thought parental love was an open checkbook. He was about to learn a very expensive lesson in contract law. I pressed the call button. I watched the double doors swing open again, and this time the room fell silent. It was not a silence of respect. It was the silence of money, or at least the appearance of it. Mr. and Mrs. Wentworth glided into the ballroom as if they were walking on water. Richard Wentworth was wearing a tuxedo that fit him a little too tightly around the waist, and his wife Barbara was dripping in diamonds that sparkled aggressively under the chandeliers. I knew for a fact those diamonds were insured for double their value and had been reported stolen twice in the last decade. It was an old insurance scam trick, but tonight they looked real enough to fool the guests. They did not look for me. They did not scan the room to see the man whose son had married their daughter. They made a beeline for the head table, waving at people they barely knew, blowing kisses to the air. But eventually, their path took them past the service area, past table 12. Richard stopped. He squinted at me as if he was trying to read a menu in a dark restaurant. He leaned down to Barbara and whispered something. I did not need to be a lip reader to know what he said. He was looking at my suit, the same charcoal suit I had worn to my wife's funeral 5 years ago. It was clean. It was pressed. But to a man like Richard Wentworth, it was an offense. Barbara covered her mouth with a napkin and giggled. It was a small, cruel sound that cut through the ambient jazz music. They did not nod. They did not smile. They just turned their backs and continued to their throne at table 1. But Courtney was not done. My daughter-in-law walked over to the captain of the waitstaff. She was wearing a white gown that looked suspiciously bridal for a Thanksgiving dinner. She pointed a manicured finger at my table. She did not point at me. She pointed at the space I occupied, as if I were a stain on the carpet. I could hear her voice clearly. The acoustics in the ballroom were excellent. This corner is too cluttered, Courtney said, her voice dripping with irritation. We are going to be taking photos near the cake display, and this background is ruining the aesthetic. It looks like the staff break room. The waiter looked uncomfortable. Ma'am, that is a guest table, he said, glancing at me apologetically. I do not care, Courtney snapped. It is an eyesore. Pull the privacy curtain. We cannot have this in the background of the official video. It throws off the entire color palette. She did not even look at me when she said it. She treated me like a pile of dirty laundry that needed to be shoved into a closet before company arrived. The waiter nodded nervously. He reached for the heavy velvet heavy cord on the wall. I sat there frozen. I watched as the thick maroon velvet curtain began to slide along the track. It moved slowly, blocking out the light, blocking out the music, blocking out the view of the son I had raised. The metal rings hissed against the rod. One by one, the faces of the other guests disappeared. First the investors at table 5, then the Wentworths at table 1, and finally Courtney, who was already turning away to check her makeup in a compact mirror. The curtain clicked shut. I was now completely walled off. I was sitting in a dark alcove next to the kitchen door and the men restroom. The only light came from the service exit sign. I was not just at the kids' table anymore. I had been erased. I looked at the heavy fabric that separated me from the party I had paid for. They wanted me invisible. They wanted my money, but they did not want the man who earned it. I picked up my fork. I was going to eat my dinner, and then I was going to serve them a dessert they would never forget. The room went silent as Courtney tapped a silver spoon against her champagne flute. The sound was sharp and commanding, cutting through the low hum of conversation. She stood up at the head table, beaming under the spotlight that I had paid for. She looked beautiful, I will admit that. But it was the kind of beauty that hides a rot underneath. She raised her glass, and the entire room followed suit. "I want to propose a toast," she said, her voice trembling with practiced emotion. "To the people who made this night and this law firm possible." I straightened my back. I adjusted the cuffs of my fraying shirt. This was it. This was the moment they would acknowledge the silent partner. The moment Bradley would nod in my direction and say, "Thanks, Dad." I did not need a statue. I just needed a nod. Courtney turned to her right, looking affectionately at her parents. "To my mother and father, Richard and Barbara Wentworth," she said, "your moral support has been the bedrock of Bradley's success. Thank you for believing in us when we were just starting out. Thank you for your guidance and your endless love." The room erupted in applause. Richard Wentworth stood up and bowed to the crowd, puffing out his chest. Barbara wiped a non-existent tear from her eye. Moral support. I felt a laugh trying to claw its way up my throat. Moral support did not pay the lease on the downtown office. Moral support did not buy the mahogany desks, the computers, or the library of law books. $340,000 of my retirement savings did that. But apparently, my money was silent, and their empty words were gold. Courtney continued. She thanked the senior partners. She thanked the interior decorator. She even thanked the caterer for the truffles. She went down a list of 20 people. My name was not on it. I sat there in the semi-darkness behind the velvet curtain and realized I was not just a guest. I was a ghost. The man sitting next to me nudged my arm. He was a young guy, maybe a paralegal or a +1 who had had too much to drink. He was loosening his tie and looking at me with glazed eyes. He gestured toward my suit with his fork. "Hey, buddy," he whispered loud enough for the whole table to hear. "You look miserable. Are you working tonight?" I looked at him confused. "Excuse me," I said. "You know, are you the driver?" he asked, pointing a thumb toward the exit. I saw a town car out front. "Are you Bradley's personal driver? You have that look. The waiting around look. If you are heading towards the airport later, let me know." I hate taking cabs. The air left my lungs. The driver. To this room full of people living on credit and pretension, I was just the help. I was the old man in the cheap suit who drove the car. I looked at Bradley. He was laughing at something his father-in-law said. He looked happy. He looked unburdened by the debt he owed me. My right hand was wrapped around the stem of my wine glass. It was a cheap glass, not the crystal ones they had at the head table. I watched my hand as if it belonged to someone else. The knuckles turned white. I thought about the 18-hour days I drove a rig across the country so Bradley could go to private school. I thought about the second mortgage I took to pay for his law degree. And then I heard it. A sickening crunch. The glass in my hand did not just break, it exploded. Shards of glass flew onto the white tablecloth. Dark red wine mixed with bright red blood began to pool on the plate in front of me. I stared at my hand. A jagged piece of glass was embedded in my palm. Blood was dripping down my wrist, staining the cuff of my shirt. But I did not feel pain. I felt clarity. The physical pain was nothing compared to the knife my son had just twisted in my back. The man next to me gasped and pushed his chair back. "Oh my God," he shouted. "The driver just cut himself." I stood up. I did not grab a napkin. I let the blood drip. It was time to leave table 12. It was time to take the microphone. I wrapped a thick white linen napkin around my bleeding hand. The crimson stain blossomed instantly against the fabric, but I did not stop to look at it. I pushed the velvet privacy curtain aside with my good hand. The metal rings shrieked against the rod, drawing eyes in my direction. I stepped out of the shadows of table 12 and began the long walk toward the stage. The room went quiet. Not the respectful silence of a toast, but the uneasy silence of witnessing a car crash. I walked past table 5 where the investors stared at the blood dripping from my clenched fist. I walked past table 1 where Richard Wentworth dropped his cigar and his wineglass. Bradley stood up, his face draining of color. He took a step toward me but stopped when he saw the look in my eyes. It was the same look I had the day I fired my entire logistics team for stealing fuel. It was the look of a man who had nothing left to lose. I walked up the 3 steps to the small stage. Courtney tried to intercept me. "You cannot be up here," she hissed, reaching for my arm. "You are ruining everything." I gently but firmly moved her aside. I did not push her. I just walked through her as if she were made of smoke. I reached the podium and took the microphone from the stand. The feedback whined for a split second, causing the guests to wince. I looked out at the sea of faces. 150 people eating the food. I paid for drinking the wine I paid for, sitting in the room I paid for. "I will not take much of your time," I said, my voice booming through the speakers. "I just wanted to thank my son Bradley and his lovely wife for the seat of honor tonight. They placed me at table 12 right next to the men's restroom. It was an illuminating perspective. I sat there listening to the toilets flush while you all listened to speeches about family values. I looked directly at Bradley. He was trembling. "My son told you that he built this firm on hard work and moral support," I continued. "But he forgot to mention the $340,000 of my retirement savings that actually paid for the lights you are sitting under. He forgot to mention that the man sitting by the latrine is the only reason he is not driving a taxi." I paused, letting the words sink in. The room was frozen. "Enjoy the truffles, ladies and gentlemen," I said. "Savor the champagne. Because this is the last meal you will ever eat on my dime. The Bank of Dad is officially closed." I dropped the microphone. I did not throw it. I just let it slip from my fingers. It hit the floor with a heavy thud that sounded like a gavel striking a block. I did not wait for a reaction. I turned and walked off the stage. I walked down the center aisle, my head held high, ignoring the whispers and the gasps. Bradley shouted after me, "Dad, wait, you cannot do this." I did not slow down. I pushed through the double doors and stepped out into the cool Boston night. The valet saw me coming and ran to get my truck. He looked at my bloody hand, but was smart enough not to ask questions. I climbed into the cab of my Ford pickup. The smell of old leather and diesel fuel was comforting. It smelled like truth. I pulled my phone from my pocket and dialed Mitchell Ross. He answered on the first ring. "It is done," I said, staring at the entrance of the Ritz-Carlton. "Are you sure?" Doug Mitchell asked. "Once we pull this trigger, there is no going back. It will destroy him." I looked at my hand. The bleeding had stopped, but the scar would remain. "Execute the poison pill," I said. "Drain the accounts, cancel the lease, and call the tow truck for the Porsche. I want him to feel what it is like to be a guest in his own life." I hung up and put the truck in gear. The war had just begun. I slept like a baby that night. It is amazing how peaceful the world feels when you finally stop carrying a dead weight on your shoulders. I woke up at 5 in the morning just like I did every day when I was hauling steel across state lines. But my son Bradley and his wife Courtney did not wake up early to work. They woke up early to spend. It was Black Friday after all. The holiest day of the year for people who think self-worth comes with a price tag. I did not need to be there to know exactly what was happening. I had the notifications set up on my phone. Ping. Transaction attempted at Louis Vuitton Newbury Street. $12,000. Ping. Transaction declined. I took a sip of my black coffee and smiled. According to the bank logs, Bradley and Courtney had walked into the boutique like they owned the place. Courtney probably needed a new limited edition handbag to help her recover from the trauma of seeing her father-in-law bleed at the dinner table. She likely picked out the most expensive item on the shelf, a bag that cost more than my first house. Bradley would have pulled out the heavy titanium black card, the card that says, "I have made it," the card that was linked directly to the capital account I had funded. I can imagine the scene perfectly. Bradley handing the card to the sales associate with that arrogant little smirk he does. The associate swiping it. The long pause. And then the sound that no millionaire ever wants to hear. Beep. Transaction not authorized. Try it again. Bradley would have said, his face flushing pink. It is a platinum chip. Sometimes the machines are sensitive. The associate would have tried again. Beep. Declined. By now, the people in line behind them would be shifting their feet and whispering. Courtney would be looking at her nails, pretending not to notice that her husband was failing to provide. I checked my phone again. The bank support line log showed an incoming call from Bradley Sterling at 10:15 a.m. He did not call me. He called the institution. He probably started screaming at some poor customer service representative, demanding to know why his credit limit was being disrespected. I know exactly what the bank told him, because I gave them the script myself. I could hear the voice of the bank manager in my head. "I am sorry, Mr. Sterling, but the primary account holder, Douglas Sterling, has placed a hard freeze on all authorized user cards. He has flagged the account for suspicious activity and revoked all secondary access privileges effective immediately." Suspicious activity. That was the phrase that surely made Bradley choke. He was the suspicious activity. For years, he had been siphoning off the firm operating budget to pay for his lifestyle. The lease on his condo, the payments on the Porsche, the trips to the Maldives. He thought I was just a silent investor who never looked at the ledger. He forgot that I spent 40 years looking for cracks in the pavement. Bradley must have stood there in the middle of the luxury store holding a piece of plastic that was now worthless. He would have had to look at Courtney and say the words that would kill his marriage faster than any affair. "I cannot pay for it." My phone buzzed again. This time, it was a text from Bradley. "Dad, call me now. There is a mistake with the bank." I deleted the message. There was no mistake. The mistake was thinking he could treat me like a guest in my own life and still spend my money like a king. I finished my coffee and walked to the window. A tow truck was turning the corner down the street. It was heading toward Bradley's downtown condo. The financial freeze was just the first domino. The real pain was about to arrive on 4 wheels. I watched the security feed from my home office monitor, sipping a cup of lukewarm tea. It was 11 in the morning, and my son Bradley was about to have the worst workday of his life. After the humiliation at the luxury boutique, he had rushed to his law firm. He probably thought he could hide there. He probably thought he could bury himself in work and figure out how to fix the credit card mess. He did not know that I had already struck the second match. Bradley arrived at the high-rise building in the financial district. This was the headquarters of Sterling and Associates. He walked up to the glass revolving doors and pushed. They did not move. The automatic sensors were dead. He frowned, pressing his face against the glass. The lobby was dark. The digital directory board was black. He forced the emergency side door open and stumbled into the lobby. It was chaos. His receptionist was sitting on the security desk crying. His junior partners were standing around holding boxes of personal belongings. There was no hum of air conditioning, no ringing of phones, no buzzing of printers, just the heavy, suffocating silence of a dead business. "What is going on?" Bradley shouted, his voice echoing in the dark lobby. "Why are the lights off? Why is nobody working?" His lead paralegal, a smart woman named Sarah, walked up to him. She was holding a flashlight and a piece of paper. "The power was cut 20 minutes ago, Bradley," she said. "The internet is down. The server is down, and the building management just posted this on the front door. She handed him the paper. I knew exactly what it said because I had drafted it with Mitchell Ross at 6 this morning. It was an immediate notice of lease termination. Bradley squinted at the paper in the dim light. "This makes no sense," he stammered. "We have a 10-year lease. We have a grace period. Who is DS Holdings?" I leaned back in my chair. DS Holdings. Douglas Sterling Holdings. Bradley was so busy playing big shot lawyer that he never bothered to look into who actually owned the building he worked in. He thought he had negotiated a brilliant deal for free rent for the first 2 years. He thought the landlord was just some faceless corporation. He never realized that the landlord was the father he sat next to the toilet. "He owns the building," Sarah said quietly. "DS Holdings is your father, Bradley." The notice says the rent-free agreement was contingent on good standing with the primary investor. It says the tenant has violated the morality clause. Bradley crumpled the paper in his fist. "Morality clause," he screamed. "This is illegal. He cannot just evict us." "Actually, he can," Sarah said. She put her flashlight down on the desk. "And since payroll is processed through the main server, which is currently a brick, I am guessing we are not getting paid this week." She picked up her box of things. "I am sorry, Bradley. I have a mortgage. I cannot work for a firm that cannot keep the lights on." Bradley watched helplessly as his staff began to walk out the door. The people he had hired. The people he had bragged to about his family connections. They were leaving him alone in the dark. He stood in the middle of his dream office surrounded by expensive mahogany furniture that he could no longer see. He pulled out his phone to call me. I watched the screen light up. I did not answer. Let him sit in the dark for a while. Let him understand that without my power, he is just a man standing in an empty room. He had turned the lights out on our relationship, so I turned the lights out on his reality. My front door did not open. It exploded inward. I was sitting in my leather armchair in the den performing my Sunday ritual. On the table in front of me lay the disassembled pieces of my grandfather's Winchester model, 1894. I was running an oil rag over the steel barrel. The smell of gun oil and old walnut wood filled the room. It was a scent that meant discipline. It was a scent that meant maintenance. Bradley and Courtney did not knock. They still had the spare key I gave them 3 years ago for emergencies. Apparently, being unable to buy a handbag constituted an emergency. They stormed into the hallway, their footsteps heavy and frantic on the hardwood floor. "You insane old man!" Courtney screamed before she even saw me. Her face was a mask of red blotchy rage. Her hair, usually perfect, was wind-blown and messy. She looked less like a socialite and more like a banshee. "You ruined my life. You froze everything. Fix it. Fix it right now." I did not look up. I continued to polish the lever action mechanism of the rifle. The metal clicked softly in the silence that followed her scream. Bradley marched up to my chair. He was sweating. His tie was loose and his eyes were wild. "Dad, are you deaf?" he shouted. "The firm is dark. The accounts are locked. Do you have any idea how embarrassing this is? I have clients calling me. I have staff walking out. You have to call the bank and tell them it was a mistake." I finally stopped cleaning. I set the rag down on the table next to a stack of papers. I looked at my son. He looked like a child who had dropped his ice cream cone and expected the world to stop spinning to clean it up. "Hello to you too, Bradley," I said calmly. "I see you still remember where I live, though usually you only visit when you need a signature on a check." "Stop the games," Dad Bradley spat. "Open the accounts." I picked up the document sitting on the top of the stack. It was a thick contract bound with a blue cover. I tossed it onto the coffee table toward them. It landed with a heavy slap. "Read it," I said. Bradley looked at it. "That is the loan agreement for the startup capital," he said dismissively. "So what?" I picked up the receiver of the rifle and clicked it back into place. The sound was sharp and final. It made Courtney take a step back. "So what?" I repeated. "You are a lawyer, Bradley. You should know that contracts have clauses. Look at page 4, paragraph 3, subsection B." Bradley snatched the paper up. His eyes scanned the page frantically. I saw the moment the blood drained from his face. His lips moved silently as he read the words. "For the benefit of your wife, I said I will summarize. The $340,000 was not a gift. It was a callable loan. The terms stated clearly that if the borrower engages in conduct that damages the reputation of the lender, the full amount becomes due immediately." "That is ridiculous," Courtney snapped. "We did not damage your reputation." I looked at her cold and steady. "You sat me by a toilet, Courtney. You treated the man who funded your life like a stray dog. In my book, that is significant reputational damage. But here's the best part. Read the next line, Bradley." Bradley swallowed hard. "Default interest rate," he whispered. "Speak up," I said, picking up a box of ammunition. "Default interest rate is 15% compounded daily," he read. 15%. Courtney gasped. "That is loan shark territory." "No," I said, standing up and placing the rifle in the rack on the wall. "That is standard high-risk investment territory. And looking at you two right now, I would say you are the highest risk I have ever taken. As of this morning, you owe me the principal plus interest. And since you violated the contract, I have exercised my right to seize collateral." "Collateral?" Bradley asked, his voice shaking. "We did not put up any collateral." I turned back to face them. "You put up everything, Bradley. The business assets, the company car. And thanks to the cross guarantee you signed without reading, your personal assets too. You are not just cut off, son. You are being collected." Courtney stared at me for a moment, her mouth hanging open in disbelief. Then her shock transformed into something much uglier. It was a raw, visceral hatred that distorted her features. She stepped away from Bradley, who was still trembling over the loan document, and walked right up to me. She was close enough that I could smell her expensive perfume, the same perfume she had bought with my corporate credit card. "You are a sad, pathetic old man," she hissed. Her voice was no longer a scream, but a low, venomous growl. "You sit here in this big, empty house polishing your guns and counting your money like a miser. You think you are teaching us a lesson, but you are just proving why you are alone. No wonder your wife died. She probably let go just to get away from you." The mention of my late wife, Margaret, tightened my jaw. Courtney knew exactly where to aim. She knew Margaret was the only soft spot I had left. But I did not flinch. I did not give her the satisfaction of seeing me bleed. "You are stingy, Douglas," she continued, poking a finger at my chest. "You have millions in the bank. Millions. And you are ruining your own son over $300,000. It is pocket change to you. You are destroying his reputation because you are jealous. You are jealous that he has a life. You are jealous that he has a future." She placed both hands on her stomach. She was only 4 months pregnant, but she wore clothes that accentuated the bump. She used that pregnancy like a shield and a sword. "Well, listen to this," she said, her eyes narrowing. "I am carrying your first grandchild, a boy. We were going to name him Douglas after you. We were going to let you be a part of his life. But if you do not tear up that contract right now, if you do not reinstate the bank accounts by noon, you will never see him." She paused to let the threat hang in the air. "You will never hold him," she said. "You will never see his first steps. You will never hear him call you Grandpa. To him, you will just be a stranger who died alone in a big house. I will make sure he hates you. I will tell him exactly what kind of monster you are." Bradley looked up from the sofa. He looked at his wife and then at me. For a second, I thought he might stop her. I thought he might say that using an unborn child as a bargaining chip was too low even for them. But he didn't. He just watched, waiting to see if the blackmail would work, waiting to see if I would crumble. I looked at Courtney. I looked at the child she was carrying, a child who was currently being used as leverage in a financial dispute. I let out a short, dry laugh. It was a sound devoid of humor. "You think that is a threat, Courtney?" I asked quietly. "You think withholding my grandchild is the ultimate punishment?" I walked over to the window and looked out at the driveway. I could see the tow truck I had called earlier turning onto the street. "I feel sorry for that baby," I said, without turning around. "I really do. Not because he won't know me, but because he will know you." I turned back to face them. And as for naming him Douglas, I said, my voice hardening, "I would strongly advise against it. You see, by the time I am done with you, the name Sterling is not going to open doors anymore. It is going to close them. When the legal journals publish the details of Bradley's fraud and your family's debts, that name will be synonymous with bankruptcy and disgrace." I stepped closer to them, towering over my son, who was still seated. "That child might grow up wishing he had any other name in the phone book," I said. "So go ahead, Courtney. Keep him away. Raise him to hate me. But just remember, when he asks why his parents lost their penthouse and why his grandfather refused to bail them out, you better tell him the truth. Tell him you traded his inheritance for a seat at the head table." "Get out of my house," I said, pointing to the door, "and take your bad debts with you." The heavy oak door clicked shut behind them, but the silence did not last long. I walked to the bay window that overlooked the circular driveway. I wanted to see the second act of this tragedy unfold. Bradley and Courtney were marching down the front steps, their heads held high, trying to salvage some dignity from the wreckage of the last 10 minutes. They headed straight for the gleaming black Porsche Panamera parked near the fountain. That car was Bradley's pride and joy. He washed it more often than he called his mother when she was alive. He thought it was a symbol of his success as a high-powered attorney. But as they rounded the hood of the car, they stopped dead in their tracks. A massive flatbed tow truck had backed up directly in front of the Porsche. It was not a random municipal truck. It was one of mine. It was painted in the signature deep blue of Sterling Logistics. The driver, a man named Mike, who had worked for me for 20 years, was already hooking the heavy steel chains onto the front axle of the sports car. I could hear Bradley screaming through the double-pane glass. He sprinted toward Mike, waving his arms like a man trying to stop a plane from taking off. "Hey, get away from my car!" Bradley shouted, lunging for the chains. "What do you think you are doing? That is private property." Mike did not even flinch. He was a big man who had spent his life hauling steel beams and concrete. He simply stepped between Bradley and the winch. "I have a work order, Mr. Bradley," Mike said calmly, holding up a clipboard. "Asset recovery. This vehicle is listed as fleet vehicle number 402, belonging to Sterling Logistics. The lease has been terminated due to non-payment and unauthorized use." Bradley looked like he had been slapped. "Unauthorized use," he sputtered. "I have been driving this car for 3 years. It is my car. My dad gave it to me." Mike shook his head. "The paperwork says it is a company perk for the Lad Council of Sterling and Associates. Since that firm is currently in default and the partnership is dissolved, the perk is revoked. I am just doing my job." He pressed the lever on the control panel. The hydraulic winch whined to life. The sound was high and piercing, cutting through the crisp autumn air. The front wheels of the Porsche lifted off the ground. The car groaned as it was dragged up the inclined bed of the truck. It looked like a wounded beetle being carried away by a predator. Courtney was standing on the lawn, clutching her stomach. "Do something, Bradley," she shrieked. "Do not let him take it. How are we supposed to get home?" Bradley looked at the car, then at the house, then back at the car. He realized he was powerless. He realized that the title in the glove box said Sterling Logistics, not Bradley Sterling. He had never paid for insurance. He had never paid for registration. He had just enjoyed the ride while I paid for the gueule. I watched as the Porsche was secured onto the flatbed. Mike did a final check of the chains, gave a polite nod to Bradley, and climbed into the cab of the truck. The diesel engine roared to life, sending a plume of black smoke into the air. As the truck pulled away, dragging the symbol of Bradley's ego with it, my son and his wife were left standing on the pavement. The wind was picking up swirling dead leaves around their ankles. They looked small. They looked lost. Bradley pulled out his phone. I assumed he was trying to call an Uber. But then I remembered he had no credit cards. His bank accounts were frozen. He stood there staring at the screen, likely realizing that for the first time in his life, he could not buy his way out of a problem. I took a sip of my tea. They had a long, cold walk ahead of them to the nearest bus stop. It would be a good time for them to reflect on the value of things. They had spent years thinking they were driving the car. They never realized they were just passengers, and I was the one holding the keys. The dust from the tow truck had barely settled on my driveway when my phone began to vibrate against the oak table. I did not need to look at the caller ID to know who it was. The timing was too perfect. I poured myself a glass of bourbon neat and watched the screen light up. Richard Wentworth. The man who thought he was the king of Boston because his great-grandfather built a library once. I swiped right and put it on speakerphone. "Douglas, you low-class thug," Richard screamed. The distortion in his voice told me he was likely red in the face and spitting on his expensive mahogany desk. "How dare you? How dare you steal my son-in-law's vehicle? Do you have any idea who you are messing with?" I took a slow sip of the amber liquid. It burned pleasantly going down. "Hello to you too, Richard," I said calmly. "I assume Bradley called you crying because he has to walk home." "You listen to me, you glorified truck driver," Richard spat. "You might have a little bit of new money, but you do not have connections. I play golf with the mayor. I sit on the board of the country club. I will make sure you never do business in this state again. I will have your zoning permits revoked. I will have your accounts audited until you bleed dry. I will bury you under so much red tape you will wish you had stayed in the garage where you belong." He was bluffing, of course. Men like Richard always bluff. They think power comes from shouting and name-dropping. They do not understand that real power comes from leverage. "Are you done, Richard?" I asked. "Or do you have more empty threats to throw at the wall?" "I am not done," Richard yelled. "I am going to call the police commissioner. I am going to have you arrested for grand theft auto." I set my glass down. I reached for the thick manila folder that my private investigator had delivered 3 days ago. It was titled The Wentworth File. I opened it to page 12. "Richard," I said, my voice dropping an octave, "before you call the commissioner, you might want to call your bookie in Atlantic City." The line went dead silent. The heavy breathing on the other end stopped. "What did you say?" Richard whispered. I ran my finger down the column of numbers. $750,000, Richard. That is how much you owe the Lucky 7 casino. And let us not forget the $200,000 you borrowed from that loan shark in Southie, the one with the neck tattoos. What was his name? Knuckles. "You are lying," Richard stammered, but his voice had lost all its venom. It was shaking now. "I have the wire transfer records." "Richard," I continued, "I know you emptied your daughter's trust fund to pay the interest last month. I know you pushed Bradley to ask me for more money, not to expand the firm, but to cover your tracks. You are not a pillar of society, Richard. You are a broke gambler living on borrowed time." I could hear him hyperventilating. The great Richard Wentworth was crumbling. "So here is the deal," I said, closing the folder. "You are going to stop threatening me. You are going to stop enabling your daughter to be a spoiled brat. And you are going to focus on paying off your debts before Knuckles decides to collect in person. Because if you ever raise your voice at me again, I will not just call the police. I will call the IRS. And I think they would be very interested in your offshore accounts in the Caymans." "Douglas, please," Richard whimpered. "Please do not." The line clicked. I hung up. I finished my bourbon. The house was quiet again. I had silenced the barking dog with a single bone of truth. Now it was time to prepare for the final act. I walked to my office and began to pack a bag. I knew the next move Bradley would make. He would get desperate. And desperate men do stupid things. They say that rock bottom is a solid foundation to build a new life on. But my son Bradley did not hit rock bottom and start building. He hit rock bottom and started digging. I sat in my office later that night reading the report my private investigator had just emailed me. I almost felt pity. Almost. Back in their condo, Bradley was pacing the floor. The silence in the apartment was deafening. No television, no music, just the sound of panic. Courtney was sitting on the designer sofa that they had not finished paying for. She was not crying anymore. She was scheming. A woman like Courtney does not know how to lose. She only knows how to double down. "We cannot let him win, Bradley," she said, her voice sharp. "If we give up now, we admit he was right. We admit we are nothing without him. We have to fight back. We have to sue him for breach of contract. We have to sue him for emotional distress." "With what money?" Bradley asked. His voice was cracked. He looked 10 years older than he did this morning. "No lawyer will take the case on contingency against Douglas Sterling. They know he has the best legal team in Boston. We need a retainer, a big one." Courtney stood up. She walked over to him and placed a hand on his cheek. It was a gesture that looked affectionate but was purely manipulative. "You know people, Bradley. You represent criminals. You represent guys who deal in cash. Go see that man you helped last year, the one who runs the nightclub in South Boston. He lends money." Bradley pulled away. "You mean Tony the Butcher?" "Are you crazy, Courtney? That guy breaks legs for late payments." "Do you want to lose this condo?" Courtney snapped. "Do you want our son to be born in a rental apartment? Do you want your father to laugh at you? Swallow your pride and get the money. Once we win the lawsuit, we pay him back with interest. It is just a bridge loan. A bridge loan. That is what fools call the rope they use to hang themselves." Bradley put on a baseball cap and sunglasses. He took a taxi to a part of town he usually only visited to bail clients out of jail. He walked into a dimly lit bar that smelled of stale beer and bad decisions. He met with a man who did not ask for a credit check. He asked for a signature on a piece of paper that had no letterhead. Bradley walked out of that bar 30 minutes later, carrying a brown paper bag. Inside was $50,000 in cash. Dirty money. Blood money. He was shaking. He knew he had just crossed a line. He had moved from financial irresponsibility to genuine danger. He did not go home. He went straight to the office of Marcus Stone. Stone was the kind of lawyer you hire when you are guilty and you want to burn the courthouse down. He was a pit bull in a cheap suit. He hated me because I had beaten him in court 5 years ago. I watched the surveillance photos of Bradley handing the bag of cash to Stone. I saw the handshake. It was the handshake of two drowning men agreeing to pull each other down. Bradley called me an hour later. He left a voicemail because I refused to pick up. "You think you can bully me, Dad?" he said. His voice slurred with liquid courage. "Well, I just hired Marcus Stone. We are filing a countersuit tomorrow morning. We are going to expose you. We are going to take everything." I listened to the message twice. I did not feel anger. I felt the cold finality of a judge passing a sentence. Bradley had just signed his own death warrant. He had borrowed money from sharks to pay a snake to fight a lion. He had no idea that the jungle has rules, and he had just broken the most important one. Never start a war you cannot afford to finish. I thought the war was over for the night, but I was wrong. The battlefield just shifted from my driveway to the internet. I was sitting in my study organizing the loan documents when my phone began to buzz incessantly. It was not a call, it was a flood of notifications. My lawyer Mitchell sent me a single text message that read, "Do not reply to anything, just read." He included a link to a Facebook post. I clicked the link. It was from Courtney's public profile. She had posted a photo of herself and Bradley sitting on a park bench looking disheveled and tragic. They must have taken it right after the tow truck left. Her mascara was smeared just enough to look artistic. The caption was longer than the Constitution, and it was a masterpiece of fiction. "To my friends and family," she wrote, "I have been silent for too long to protect the reputation of a man. I tried to love like a father. But tonight, for the safety of my unborn child, I must speak my truth. We are survivors of narcissistic abuse." I took a sip of water. Survivors. I had survived mortar fire in Vietnam. They had survived a declined credit card transaction. She continued weaving a tale that made me sound like a monster. She claimed that I used money as a weapon to control their every move. She wrote that I had kicked them out of their family home because they refused to let me dictate the name of their child. She claimed that the $340,000 I lent them was actually a trust fund that I had stolen from Bradley's late mother. That was the line that made my blood run cold. She was dragging my dead wife into her web of lies. "Douglas Sterling is a predator," she wrote. "He preys on family. He isolates us. He financially abuses us to keep us compliant. Tonight he left his pregnant daughter-in-law on the street without a car or a way home just because we set a healthy boundary. Please pray for us as we try to rebuild from zero." I scrolled down to the comments. They were coming in by the hundreds. People who had never met me were calling for my head. A woman from Ohio wrote, "I hope this old man rots in hell." A man from Florida commented, "Someone needs to teach him a lesson." The post had already been shared 2,000 times. It was viral. Courtney knew exactly what she was doing. She knew she could not win in a court of law where evidence matters, so she took the case to the court of public opinion where feelings matter more than facts. She used all the buzzwords: toxic, gaslighting, narcissist. She painted a target on my back and handed out the ammunition to strangers. I watched the share count climb. 2,500. 3,000. My business page began to flood with one-star reviews. People were calling for a boycott of Sterling Logistics. They were attacking my drivers. They were attacking my legacy. I turned off the screen. I did not feel the urge to defend myself in the comments section. You cannot argue with a mob, and you certainly cannot argue with a professional victim. Courtney had just escalated this from a family dispute to a public execution. She wanted to destroy my name so that when we finally went to court, the judge would already hate me. It was a smart move. Evil, but smart. But she forgot one thing. The internet never forgets, but it also leaves a trail. And she had just posted libelous accusations on a public forum. She thought she was writing a sob story, but she was actually writing her own confession. I picked up the phone to call Mitchell. We had a defamation lawsuit to prepare. I had just finished a call with my defamation attorney when the doorbell rang. It was not a delivery, and it was not a neighbor. It was 2 officers from Adult Protective Services. They were standing on my porch, looking uncomfortable, holding a clipboard that contained a very serious accusation. A report had been filed claiming that Douglas Sterling, 72 years old, was suffering from rapid cognitive decline and posed an immediate danger to himself. The report cited erratic behavior, paranoia, and self-isolation. It claimed I was living in filth and forgetting to eat. I invited them in. I did not argue. I did not raise my voice. I led them into my living room, which was spotless. I showed them my refrigerator, which was stocked with fresh food. I showed them my medication organizer, which was perfectly sorted. I answered their questions with the precision of a man who had testified before congressional hearings on transportation safety. "Do you know what day it is?" Mr. Sterling, the younger officer, asked. It is Tuesday, November 28th, I said. And if you are asking because of the report filed by my daughter-in-law, let me save you some time. This visit is not about my health. It is about my bank account. The officers exchanged a look. They had seen this before. The weaponization of the system by greedy relatives. They conducted their assessment. They checked the house for safety hazards. They checked my vitals. They found nothing wrong. In fact, the older officer told me I was in better shape than most men half my age. But as they were leaving, the older officer stopped at the door. "Mr. Sterling," he said quietly. "The report was anonymous, but it contained details about your medical history that only a family member or a doctor would know. Someone is building a case against you. They are trying to establish a pattern. This visit will go down as unfounded, but the paper trail has started. You need to be careful. If they file for emergency guardianship, they could freeze your assets before you even get a court date." I thanked him and closed the door. My hands were steady, but my mind was racing. Emergency guardianship. Conservatorship. That was the endgame. Courtney and Bradley did not just want to sue me. They wanted to erase me. They wanted to declare me incompetent so they could step in as my legal guardians and take control of the Sterling estate. It was a terrifying strategy. It stripped a person of their rights, their dignity, and their voice. I walked to my office and pulled out the file on Richard Wentworth again. I had missed something. I flipped through the pages until I found it. A small credit card charge from 3 months ago. A dinner at a steakhouse in downtown Boston. The attendees were listed as Richard Wentworth and Dr. Alan Thorne. I searched the name Dr. Alan Thorne online. He was a geriatric psychiatrist, a specialist in dementia and competency evaluations. And according to public records, he had been reprimanded twice by the medical board for unethical billing practices. The pieces clicked into place. They were not just hoping I would seem crazy. They were manufacturing a diagnosis. They had a doctor on payroll ready to sign an affidavit saying I was losing my mind. The visit from APS was just the opening move to get an official record started. They were trying to trap me in a medical prison of their own making. I picked up the phone. "Mitchell," I said when he answered. "We need to move up the timeline. They are going for a conservatorship." "I am already on it," Mitchell said. "But Doug, if they have a doctor willing to lie, things are about to get very ugly. You need to disappear. If they serve you with papers, you are stuck in the system. You need to be nowhere to be found until we are ready to strike back." I looked around my home, the house I had built with Margaret, the house where I raised the son who was now trying to lock me away. I knew what I had to do. I had to become a ghost. Not the kind they ignored at a dinner party, but the kind they could not catch. I began to pack. I sat at my mahogany desk with the only light coming from the glowing screen of my laptop. My private investigator Vance had just sent over the attachment I was dreading. It was a medical evaluation signed by Dr. Alan Thorne. The timestamp showed it had been filed with the court clerk just hours ago. I opened the document and felt the blood boil in my veins. According to this piece of paper, I was a man in the advanced stages of vascular dementia. The report claimed that I was disoriented to time and place. It stated that I had been found wandering the streets in my pajamas, looking for my deceased wife. It claimed that I had left the gas stove on 3 times in the last month, endangering the lives of my neighbors. Every single word was a lie. A meticulously crafted, expensive lie. I had never met Dr. Alan Thorne in my life. The dates listed for his supposed home visits were days I was at the logistics depot, overseeing a fleet inspection. I had surveillance footage of myself at work on those specific dates, but the court would not know that yet. To a judge reading this urgent motion, I was just a senile old man who needed to be saved from himself. I scrolled down to the bottom of the document. The recommendation was clear and brutal. It recommended immediate emergency conservatorship. It suggested that Bradley Sterling be appointed as the temporary guardian of my person and my estate. It gave him the power to make medical decisions for me. It gave him the power to place me in a secure facility. And most importantly, it gave him the power to access and control all my financial assets to pay for my care. Care. That was the word they used to mask their theft. They did not want to care for me. They wanted to bury me in a medicated fog while they drained the accounts I had spent 50 years filling. I looked at the signature of Dr. Thorne again. It was a jagged scrawl. I wondered how much Richard Wentworth had paid for that signature. Was it $10,000? $20,000? Whatever the price, it was cheap compared to the millions they stood to gain. I printed the document. The sound of the printer rhythmically spitting out the pages was the only sound in the house. I held the warm paper in my hand. This was their ace in the hole. They thought this medical report was their golden ticket. They thought that once I was labeled incompetent, anything I said would be dismissed as the ramblings of a sick mind. But they had made a fatal error. By filing this fraudulent document, they had moved from civil manipulation to criminal conspiracy. Falsifying medical records to influence a court proceeding is a felony. Richard Wentworth and his crooked doctor had just handed me the weapon I needed to destroy them. I folded the report and placed it in my travel bag. They wanted a patient. I would give them a defendant. The text message from Bradley arrived at 6 in the morning. It was short and seemingly desperate. Dad, please meet us at the Four Seasons. No lawyers, just family. We want to apologize and make things right. Please come alone. I knew it was a lie before I even finished reading the sentence. In my 72 years, I have learned that desperate men do not want to apologize. They want to negotiate. But I also knew that for my counterattack to work, I needed them to say the quiet part out loud. I needed them to incriminate themselves on tape. I put on my best confused old man performance. I wore a sweater instead of a suit. I purposely left my hair a little uncombed. I placed a high-fidelity digital recorder in the inside pocket of my jacket and drove to the hotel. I walked into the private conference room Bradley had rented. It was not just family. Bradley was there looking pale and sweaty. Courtney was sitting next to him looking like a cat who had just cornered a mouse. But there were 2 other men in the room. I recognized one immediately as Marcus Stone, the ambulance-chasing lawyer Bradley had hired with the loan shark money. The other man was older with thin wire-rimmed glasses and a cold, clinical stare. That had to be Dr. Alan Thorne, the man who had diagnosed me with dementia from across town. Bradley stood up as I entered. "Dad, thank you for coming," he said. His voice was shaking. "We just want to help you. We are so worried about your health." I sat down slowly, pretending to be unsure of my surroundings. "Who are these people, Bradley?" I asked, keeping my voice weak. "You said it was just family." "This is for your own good," Douglas Courtney interrupted. She gestured to the man in the glasses. "This is Dr. Thorne. He is a specialist. He agrees with us that you have not been yourself lately. The rage, the forgetfulness, the paranoia. It is not safe for you to be managing your own affairs anymore." Marcus Stone slid a thick document across the polished mahogany table. It was not a menu. It was a durable power of attorney granting Bradley full control over my medical and financial decisions. "We have a choice here," Mr. Sterling Stone said, smoothing his cheap tie. "Dr. Thorne is prepared to testify in court tomorrow that you are mentally incompetent. If we go down that road, it will be public. It will be messy. The state will get involved. Or you can sign this document right now. You retire. You let Bradley manage the estate. We put you in a very nice assisted living facility in Vermont. Quiet. Peaceful. No stress." I looked at the paper. Then I looked at Bradley. He refused to meet my eyes. "So this is the deal," I asked. "I sign over my life and my money, or you declare me insane." "It is not a deal," Dad Bradley whispered. It is an intervention. We love you. We just want to protect the legacy. Protect the legacy. He meant spend the legacy. I looked at Dr. Thorne. And you, doctor, I asked, you are willing to swear under oath that I am unfit without ever examining me? Thorne smiled a thin, oily smile. I have reviewed the statements from your family, Mr. Sterling. The clinical picture is clear. Vascular dementia is aggressive. It is best to hand over the keys before you hurt someone. I reached for the pen. I let my hand tremble just enough to sell the act. Inside my jacket, the digital recorder was capturing every word of their extortion plot. They were not saving me. They were mugging me in a 5-star hotel. I tapped the pen against the paper. I need a moment to think, I said. This is a big decision. Take your time, Stone said. But we need a signature before you leave this room. I leaned back. I had what I needed. Now I just needed to get out of there before the trap snapped shut on my fingers. I stared at the gold pen lying on the polished mahogany table. I let my hand hover over it, shaking visibly. It was not hard to fake. The rage vibrating inside my chest was enough to make my extremities tremble, but I needed them to think it was fear. I needed them to think it was the frailty of a dying mind. I looked up at Bradley. I let my eyes drift out of focus. I slumped my shoulders, making myself look smaller. I asked him where his mother was. I asked him if Margaret was coming to pick me up, because I did not have my car keys. The reaction in the room was immediate. Bradley looked at Courtney with a mixture of relief and disgust. He thought I was gone. He thought the father who had taught him how to throw a baseball and how to read a balance sheet had finally left the building. Mom is gone. Dad, Bradley said, his voice thick with fake sympathy. She died 5 years ago. Remember, you are confused. That is why you need to sign this. That is why you need me to take care of the money. I reached for the glass of water and spilled a little on the table on purpose. I apologized profusely, dabbing at the spill with my sleeve like a frightened child. I do not want to go to the home, I whimpered. I want to stay in my house. It has the garden Margaret liked. You can visit the garden, Courtney said, snapping her fingers at the lawyer to push the paper closer. But you cannot live there alone. You are a danger to yourself. Just sign the paper, Douglas, and we will make sure you are comfortable. We will take care of everything. The accounts, the property, the investments. I looked at Dr. Thorne. The man was watching me like a vulture waiting for a wounded animal to stop kicking. I needed him to say it. I needed him to confirm the conspiracy on the recording device that was currently humming in my breast pocket. But doctor, I said, my voice cracking. You never examined me. How do you know I am sick? Maybe I am just tired. Thorne leaned forward. His arrogance was his undoing. Mr. Sterling, the paperwork is already filed. My professional opinion is based on the ample evidence provided by your son. The court does not need a physical exam when the behavioral decline is this obvious. You are signing this voluntary guardianship to avoid a humiliating public trial where I will testify that you are completely incapacitated. It is a kindness, really. I looked at Marcus Stone, the lawyer. And the money, I asked. What happens to the money? Stone smirked. The estate will be placed in a trust managed by Bradley. He will have full discretion to liquidate assets to cover your care expenses and any outstanding family liabilities. Family liabilities. There it was. They were admitting they intended to use my life savings to pay off their gambling debts and failed lifestyle. They had just confessed to conspiracy to commit fraud and elder abuse. I picked up the pen. I brought the tip down to the signature line. I could hear Bradley hold his breath. I could feel the greed radiating off them like heat from a furnace. I stopped. I looked at the pen, then I looked at Bradley. Is this the same pen you used to sign the loan agreement? I asked. My voice was no longer shaking. It was steady. It was cold. It was the voice of the CEO of Sterling Logistics. Bradley blinked, confused by the sudden change in tone. What? I dropped the pen. It rolled across the table and fell onto the floor. I do not think I will sign today, I said, sitting up straight and buttoning my suit jacket. I think I will wait for the judge to hear this recording instead. I tapped my chest pocket. The color drained from 4 faces simultaneously. I stood up and walked to the door. I was not a frail old man anymore. I was the storm that was about to make landfall. I sat in the front seat of my truck, with the doors locked and the engine running. My hands were gripping the steering wheel so tight my knuckles were white. I was not shaking from fear anymore. I was shaking from the adrenaline of having sat in a room with 3 vultures who wanted to pick my bones clean. I reached into my pocket and pulled out the small black digital recorder. The red light was still blinking. I pressed stop and then I pressed rewind. I needed to hear it again. I needed to be absolutely certain that I had captured the moment the mask slipped. I put the device up to my ear and pressed play. The audio was crisp. I heard the sound of my own voice trembling, asking for water. I heard the sound of the glass spilling on the table. And then I heard the silence as I pretended to be confused about where my wife was. That was the moment. That was when Courtney stopped pretending. On the recording, her voice was sharp and impatient. She was not talking to me. She was talking to Bradley and the doctor, assuming I was too senile to process the words. "He is worse than I thought," Courtney said on the tape. "We cannot wait for the 1st of the month, Bradley. We need to liquidate the estate now." I heard Bradley mumble something about the house being in a trust. "Screw the trust," Courtney snapped. "Once you have the guardianship signature, we are the trustees. We list the house on Monday. I already have a cash buyer lined up. It is a developer who wants to tear it down. He is offering $2.5 million for the land." Tear it down. My breath caught in my throat. That house was not just wood and brick. It was where Margaret and I had spent 40 years. It was where we planted the oak tree in the backyard. "We take the cash," Courtney continued, "and we wire the first $1 million to my father. He needs to cover the margin call on his investment accounts, or he is going to jail. The rest goes to paying off your law firm debt and getting us a proper place in Beacon Hill." I heard the doctor voice chime in. "Just make sure the facility fees are paid up front, Mrs. Sterling. I do not run a charity." "Don't worry," Courtney said. "Once we sell the old man's portfolio, there will be plenty for everyone. He won't even know he is gone. We tell him the house is being fumigated and move him to the nursing home. By the time he realizes he is not going back, it will be too late." I stopped the recording. The silence in the truck was heavy. They were not just going to steal my money. They were going to bulldoze my memories to pay for their mistakes. Courtney was willing to destroy the only home her husband had ever known just to keep her father out of prison for his own financial crimes. I looked out the window at the gray Boston skyline. A cold rain had started to fall. I felt a tear run down my cheek. It was not a tear of sadness. It was a tear of mourning for the son I once had. The Bradley on that tape was not the boy I raised. He was an accessory to a crime. He sat there and let his wife plan the demolition of his childhood home, and he did not say a word to stop her. I put the recorder in the glove box and locked it. That little machine was no longer just a recording. It was a grenade. And I was going to pull the pin in a courtroom. I pulled my truck up to the main gate of Sterling Logistics at 7 o'clock on Monday morning. The sun was just hitting the chrome bumpers of the fleet lined up in the yard. It was a sight that usually filled me with pride. 500 trucks, 500 drivers moving America. But today, the gate did not open. I rolled down my window and swiped my badge against the reader. It gave a long, angry beep. Access denied. I swiped it again, thinking it was a glitch. Access denied. A security guard walked out of the booth. It was not Frank, who had worked the morning shift for 10 years. It was a stranger. A young guy in a uniform that looked too big for him. He did not look me in the eye. He looked at the clipboard in his hands. "Mr. Sterling," he said, "I cannot let you in." I looked at him. "Son, do you know whose name is on that building? Open the gate." He stepped back and put a hand on his radio. "Please, sir, do not make this difficult. I have strict orders. If you attempt to enter the premises, I have to call the police." Before I could respond, a black sedan pulled up behind me. A man in a cheap suit got out. I recognized the look immediately. He was a process server. He walked up to my window and dropped a stack of papers onto my passenger seat. "You have been served, Mr. Sterling," he said. I picked up the documents. The header was stamped with the seal of the Suffolk County Superior Court. Temporary restraining order and motion for preliminary injunction. I scanned the legal jargon. It was brutal. Plaintiff Bradley Sterling acting as temporary guardian ad litem for Douglas Sterling. Defendant Douglas Sterling. The order claimed that due to my severe cognitive decline and erratic behavior, my presence at the company posed an immediate threat to the financial stability of the corporation and the safety of the employees. It cited the fake medical report from Dr. Thorne. It cited the police visit. It painted a picture of a deranged old man trying to burn down his own legacy. The judge had signed it. Granted ex parte. That meant they had gone to the judge without me present. They had spun their lies in a closed chamber, and the judge, believing it was an emergency, had handed them the keys to my kingdom. I was legally barred from stepping foot on the property I had bought with my own sweat. I was barred from accessing company computers. I was barred from contacting senior management. I looked through the chain-link fence. I could see my employees walking into the building. They were my work family. And now, thanks to a piece of paper and a lying son, I was a trespasser. I looked at the security guard. He looked terrified. He thought I was going to ram the gate. He thought I was the crazy man described in those papers. I put the truck in reverse. I did not scream. I did not honk. I simply backed up and turned around. Bradley thought this was a victory. He thought locking me out would stop me. He did not understand that a general does not need to be on the front lines to win a war. He just needs to know where the enemy is sleeping. And I knew exactly where Bradley was sleeping. He was sleeping in a house of cards, and the wind was picking up. I was miles away when the flashing lights painted my quiet suburban street in chaotic shades of red and blue. My neighbor, Mrs. Gable, told me later that it looked like a raid on a drug kingpin, not a welfare check on a 72-year-old retiree. 2 squad cars blocked the driveway. Uniformed officers marched up the front steps with the heavy, grim determination of men who believed they were saving a life. They had the emergency order in hand, signed by a judge who had bought into the fiction that I was a danger to myself. They did not knock for long. When no one answered, they used the key Bradley had eagerly provided. I can only imagine the scene inside. They likely burst in, expecting to find a senile old man huddled in filth or perhaps unconscious on the floor. They were ready to drag me out and strap me to a gurney for a one-way trip to Dr. Thorne's psychiatric ward. But all they found was an echo. The house was not just empty. It was pristine. I had spent the last 4 hours scrubbing every surface. I made the bed with military corners tight enough to bounce a quarter. I cleaned the coffee maker. I even vacuumed the carpets in perfectly straight lines. I wanted them to see the order. I wanted them to see the discipline. A demented man does not leave a house looking like a showroom. A demented man does not empty his wall safe, leaving the door wide open to show that the bird has flown with the golden eggs. Bradley arrived shortly after the police. Mrs. Gable said he looked like a madman. He sprinted past the officers, screaming my name. He tore through the house, running from the study to the master bedroom. He was not looking for his father. He was looking for the leverage. He was checking the hiding spots he knew about from his childhood. the loose floorboard in the closet, the false bottom in the desk drawer. He found nothing. No cash, no deeds, no stock certificates. Not even the silver watch I used to let him wear for special occasions. I was sitting in the passenger seat of Mitchell Ross's nondescript sedan, watching the rain streak against the window as we crossed the state line into New Hampshire. We were heading to a cabin I had bought under a shell corporation 20 years ago, a place Bradley knew nothing about. "This is a risk," Doug Mitchell said, keeping his eyes on the wet road. "Flight can be interpreted as guilt. If they find you before we file our motion, they will use this to prove you are irrational. They will say you are running from reality." "I am not running from reality," I said quietly, touching the breast pocket where the digital recorder rested against my heart. "I am running toward justice. Let them have the empty house, Mitchell. Let them have the furniture and the curtains. They cannot pay their debts with throw pillows." I thought about Courtney. She was probably waiting by the phone expecting the call that I was in custody. She was probably already browsing real estate listings for penthouses in Beacon Hill, counting money that was currently sitting in an offshore trust beyond her reach. I closed my eyes and finally allowed myself to relax. For the first time in days, I felt safe. Not because I was hiding, but because I was armed. I had the truth. I had the evidence. And now I had the element of surprise. Bradley thought he was fighting a defensive war against a confused old man. He did not realize that the old man had just flanked him. We drove into the darkness, leaving the sirens and the lies behind. The next time they saw me, I would not be a patient. I would be the plaintiff, and I would bring a storm that would wash their house of cards into the sea. The Suffolk County Superior Court is a building designed to intimidate. High ceilings, marble floors, echoing footsteps. I walked in through the heavy oak doors, not as a fugitive, but as a man who owns the pavement he walks on. I was wearing my best navy suit, the one I usually saved for board meetings. My tie was crisp. My shoes were polished to a mirror shine. Beside me, Mitchell Ross carried a briefcase that contained the nuclear codes of this family destruction. We took our seats at the plaintiff table. Across the aisle, Bradley and Courtney were putting on the performance of a lifetime. If there was an Oscar for courtroom drama, they would have swept the awards. Courtney was wearing a beige maternity dress that looked like something a pioneer woman would wear on the prairie. No makeup, no jewelry. Her hair was pulled back in a severe bun. She was dabbing her eyes with a tissue every 30 seconds, looking at the jury box with the eyes of a frightened doe. Bradley sat next to her. He had traded his Italian silk for an off-the-rack gray suit that was a size too big, making him look shrunken and pathetic. He kept his head down, wringing his hands. They were selling a narrative. The narrative of the poor young couple being persecuted by a rich, deranged tyrant. The jury filed in. 12 strangers who would decide the fate of my legacy. I watched them look at Courtney. I saw the sympathy in the eyes of the older woman in the front row. I saw the way the young man in the back glared at me. Marcus Stone had done his job during jury selection. He had picked people who looked like they had soft hearts and empty wallets. "All rise." The bailiff's voice boomed. Judge Harrison walked in. He was a no-nonsense man with a reputation for hating time-wasters. He sat down and looked over his glasses at the two tables. "Mr. Stone, you may proceed with your opening statement." Marcus Stone stood up. He walked over to the jury box, leaning in close as if sharing a secret. "Ladies and gentlemen," he began, his voice dripping with faux sorrow. "This is not a case about money. This is a tragedy. You are going to hear about a father whose mind has betrayed him, a man who in his confusion and paranoia has turned on the very people who love him most. You will see evidence of irrational behavior, of rage, of a man who is a danger to himself and others. We are asking you not to punish Douglas Sterling, but to save him, to grant his son the guardianship necessary to protect him." I listened to every word. I watched Courtney let out a perfectly timed sob when Stone mentioned my deceased wife. It was magnificent. It was repulsive. They were painting a portrait of a monster and hanging it around my neck. But they forgot one thing. A painting is just oil and canvas, and I was about to bring a flamethrower. Mitchell leaned over to me and whispered, "Let them talk, Doug. The higher they build the scaffold, the harder they fall when we kick it out from under them." Dr. Alan Thorne walked to the witness stand with the confidence of a man who believed his medical degree was a shield against perjury. He adjusted his wire-rimmed glasses and placed his hand on the Bible. He swore to tell the truth, but I knew that for men like Thorne, truth was just a variable that changed depending on who signed the check. Marcus Stone guided him through the questioning like a conductor leading an orchestra. Dr. Thorne described a patient he had never met. He used big medical words to dazzle the jury. He talked about cognitive deficits and executive dysfunction. He claimed that my behavior at the Thanksgiving dinner was a classic symptom of frontal lobe deterioration. In my professional opinion, Dr. Thorne said, looking gravely at the jury, Mr. Sterling is no longer capable of managing his own affairs. His aggression toward his family is a defense mechanism to hide his confusion. He is a danger to his estate and potentially to himself. I sat there and watched him lie. I watched him sell my freedom for a retainer fee. I did not outburst. I did not shout. I just wrote a note on my legal pad and slid it to Mitchell. It was a single word: fraud. Then it was Bradley's turn. My son walked to the stand. He looked small in his oversized suit. He looked like a grieving child forced to make a difficult decision. Mr. Stone asked him about the money, the $340,000 that started this war. Bradley let out a long sigh. He looked at me with eyes full of fake sadness. "My father gave me that money to start the firm," he said. "It was a gift. He told me he was proud of me. He said it was his way of investing in the family legacy. There was never any talk of a loan. There was never any contract. He is only calling it a loan now because his illness makes him paranoid. He thinks everyone is trying to steal from him. A gift." The word hung in the air like a bad smell. I remembered the day he signed the papers. I remembered him thanking me for the low interest rate. I remembered him promising to pay it back in 5 years. And now, under oath in front of a judge and jury, he was rewriting history. He was turning my generosity into a symptom of my alleged insanity. I looked at the jury. They were nodding. They believed him. Why wouldn't they? Who would suspect a son of lying about his own father's mental health just to avoid paying a debt? It was too evil to be true. But they did not know Bradley Sterling. They did not know that his morality had a price tag, and he had sold it long ago. Bradley wiped a tear from his cheek. "I just want my dad back," he whispered. "I do not care about the money. I just want him safe." It was a masterclass in manipulation. But as Bradley stepped down from the stand, I saw a flicker of a smile on his face. He thought he had won. He thought that by denying the existence of the contract, he had erased the debt. He forgot that we live in a digital world. He forgot that paper can be shredded, but data lives forever. And he certainly forgot that perjury is a felony that carries a prison sentence much longer than the term of a loan. Mitchell Ross stood up slowly, adjusting his cufflinks. He looked at the judge with a calm expression that terrified the opposition. "Your Honor, the defense calls Ms. Elena Rodriguez to the stand." The heavy doors at the back of the courtroom swung open. A young woman walked down the center aisle. She was wearing a modest suit, but I recognized her immediately. She was the event coordinator from the Ritz-Carlton. She was the woman Bradley had snapped at when the champagne was not cold enough. Bradley turned in his seat. I saw his brow furrow. He leaned over to whisper to Marcus Stone, but the lawyer just shrugged. They had no idea why a hotel employee was relevant to a competency hearing. They were about to find out. Mitchell walked her through the preliminaries. Name, job title, shift logs. She confirmed she was managing the front desk on the afternoon of the gala. Ms. Rodriguez Mitchell said, pacing in front of the jury box. Did you have a conversation with the plaintiffs regarding the seating arrangements for the defendant, Douglas Sterling? Yes, I did, she answered clearly. Mr. and Mrs. Sterling came to the desk at 4 o'clock to make last-minute changes. And was there any record of this interaction? Mitchell asked. Yes, she nodded. The concierge desk is monitored by security cameras that record both video and audio for quality assurance and training purposes. Mitchell turned to the judge. Your Honor, we would like to submit Exhibit C into evidence. This is the raw, unedited footage from the Ritz-Carlton security server subpoenaed 3 days ago. Bradley froze. He had forgotten. He lived his life assuming that the world only watched when he wanted it to. He forgot that in a high-end hotel there are eyes everywhere. Marcus Stone tried to object, claiming it was irrelevant, but the judge silenced him with a wave of his hand. The large flat-screen monitor on the wall flickered to life. The timestamp showed 4:05 p.m. The image was high definition. There was Courtney looking impeccable and cruel. There was Bradley laughing and holding a coffee cup. The audio filled the courtroom. It was loud. It was crisp. It was damning. On the screen, Courtney pointed a manicured finger at the seating chart. You have to move him, she said, her voice dripping with disdain. I cannot have him at the main table. He eats like a peasant. It ruins the aesthetic. Then the jury heard Bradley's voice, the same voice that had just cracked with fake emotion on the witness stand. Just stick him in the back corner, Bradley said on the video. Put him next to the bathrooms. Courtney laughed. It was a cold, sharp sound. Perfect. He can sit by the toilets. Maybe the smell will remind him of his garage. Just make sure there is a curtain so the investors do not have to look at his cheap suit. Bradley chuckled. Yeah, keep the wallet in the room, but keep the man out of sight. As long as the check clears, I do not care if he eats on the floor. The video ended. The screen went black. For 3 seconds, there was absolute silence in the room. Then the reaction hit like a wave. The jury box erupted in a collective gasp. The older woman in the front row who had looked at Bradley with sympathy 10 minutes ago now looked at him with pure revulsion. She covered her mouth with her hand, shaking her head. The young man in the back crossed his arms and glared at Courtney. I looked at my son. He was shrinking into his chair. His face was a mask of panic. He realized that his performance of the grieving, loving son had just been exposed as a fraud. He wasn't protecting me. He was mocking me. He was stripping me of my dignity for a laugh. The jury had seen the truth. They saw two predators playing with their food. And judging by the look on the judge's face, the predators were about to become the prey. The silence in the courtroom was heavy, but Mitchell Ross did not give the jury time to breathe. He did not let the shock of the hotel video fade before he struck the second blow. He turned to the bailiff and called Arthur Henderson to the stand. Arthur was a man I had known for 30 years. He was the regional manager of First National Bank. He was a man who wore gray suits and spoke in a monotone voice that made excitement sound like a spreadsheet error. But today his boring demeanor was exactly what we needed. He was the personification of indisputable fact. Mitchell handed Arthur a thick binder. The pages were flagged with bright yellow sticky notes. Mr. Henderson, Mitchell said, walking back to the podium. You manage the business accounts for Sterling and Associates, is that correct? That is correct, Arthur said, adjusting his glasses. And you are familiar with the capital injection of $340,000 made by Douglas Sterling last year? I am, Arthur replied. It was deposited into the primary operating account. This account is legally designated for business expenses only. Rent, payroll, utilities. Mitchell smiled. It was a shark smile. Please turn to page 4 of the ledger, Mitchell said. Can you read the line item for November 24th? Arthur squinted at the page. Transaction ID 4092, debit card purchase, $12,400. Merchant is Hermes of Boston. The jury shifted in their seats. Hermes Mitchell repeated. For the benefit of the jury, Mr. Henderson, is Hermes a legal research firm? Is it a supplier of office paper? No, sir, Arthur said, his face completely straight. It is a luxury fashion retailer. And to your knowledge, does a $12,000 handbag help a law firm win cases? Objection, Marcus Stone shouted, standing up. Relevancy. Overruled, the judge snapped. He was writing furiously on his notepad. Mitchell did not stop. He flipped the page. Let us look at November 1st. A wire transfer for $50,000. Can you read the recipient? Arthur cleared his throat. The recipient is Lucky 7 Holdings, LLC. And what is the business nature of Lucky 7 Holdings? Mitchell asked. It is the parent company of the Golden Chip Casino in Atlantic City, Arthur said. The courtroom buzzed. A casino. The jury looked at Bradley. He was looking at his shoes. Courtney was looking at the ceiling, as if hoping to be abducted by aliens. And was there a memo attached to this wire transfer? Mitchell asked. Yes, Arthur said. The memo line reads, payment for R. Wentworth, account number 882. Mitchell turned to look directly at Richard Wentworth, who was sitting in the gallery behind his daughter. Richard turned a shade of purple I had never seen on a human being before. So Mitchell said, his voice ringing off the walls. To be clear, the money that Douglas Sterling provided to keep the lights on at his son's law firm was used to buy designer purses and pay off the gambling debts of his father-in-law. That appears to be the case, Arthur said, closing the binder. Mitchell turned to the jury. Ladies and gentlemen, the plaintiffs claim Douglas Sterling is paranoid because he thinks people are stealing from him. But as the bank records clearly show, he is not paranoid. He is just good at math. His son stole the capital. He laundered it through luxury goods and bad debts. And when the money ran out, they tried to lock the old man away so they could sell his house and keep the party going. He looked at Bradley. No further questions, Mitchell said. I looked at my son. He was shaking. The narrative of the poor struggling lawyer was dead. The numbers had killed it. He was not a victim. He was an embezzler. And I was the only one in the room who knew that the next witness would put the final nail in the coffin. The room was already spinning from the bank revelations, but Mitchell Ross was not a man to leave a wounded animal suffering. He walked back to the witness stand, where Dr. Alan Thorne was sitting. The doctor looked like he wanted to melt into the floor. He was wiping his forehead with a handkerchief that was already soaked through. The arrogance he had shown earlier was gone, replaced by the primal fear of a man watching his career disintegrate. Mitchell picked up a single sheet of paper from his table. He held it by the corner as if it were contaminated. Dr. Thorne Mitchell said, his voice deceptively soft. You testified earlier that your evaluation of Mr. Sterling was impartial and based solely on clinical data provided by the family. You stated under oath that your fee was a standard consultation rate. Thorne cleared his throat. That is correct, he croaked. Standard hourly billing. Mitchell placed the paper on the ledge of the witness box. Then can you explain this transaction? Mitchell asked. This is a wire transfer from the personal savings account of Mrs. Courtney Sterling. It is dated November 27th. That is exactly 1 day before you filed your medical report. The amount is $25,000. The jury gasped again. $25,000 was not a consultation fee. It was a down payment on a lie. Thorne looked at the paper. His hands started to shake uncontrollably. He looked over at Marcus Stone for help, but the defense lawyer was staring at his desk, knowing the ship was sinking. I do not recall that specific transfer, Thorne stammered. I have many administrative assistants. It might be a retainer for future services. Mitchell leaned in close. His voice dropped to a growl that only the front row could hear, but the microphone picked up every syllable. Do not lie to me, Dr. Mitchell said. We have the email chain between you and Courtney Sterling. In the email dated November 26th, she asks if $25,000 is enough to guarantee a diagnosis of severe dementia. You replied that for that price you would sign anything she wanted. Mitchell turned to the judge. Your Honor, we have the emails right here. This man did not diagnose a patient. He sold a medical opinion to the highest bidder. The judge looked at Dr. Thorne. His face was like granite. Dr. Thorne, he said, I am going to remind you of the penalties for perjury and medical fraud. If you lie to this court one more time, I will have the bailiff take you into custody right now. Did you falsify the report? Thorne broke. It was ugly. He slumped forward, his face burying in his hands. He started to sob. They told me he was crazy. Thorne blubbered, pointing a shaking finger at Bradley and Courtney. They told me he was dangerous. They said it was just a formality to get him into a home. I needed the money. My practice is in debt. I never met Douglas Sterling. I just used a template and filled in his name. It is all fake. The dementia, the confusion, all of it. The courtroom erupted into chaos. The judge hammered his gavel, but nobody could hear it over the noise. I looked at Bradley. He was white as a sheet. Courtney was gripping the table, her knuckles turning blue. Their entire case, their entire justification for stealing my life had just been exposed as a criminal conspiracy. I looked at the jury. They were not looking at me with pity anymore. They were looking at me with respect. And they were looking at my son with pure, unadulterated hatred. The doctor had fallen. The lie was dead. And now there was nothing left standing between my son and the consequences of his greed. The bailiff escorted the sobbing doctor out of the courtroom, but the silence he left behind was heavy with tension. Bradley was cornered, but he was not dead yet. He stood up, adjusting his oversized suit jacket, and looked at the judge with a desperation that was almost painful to watch. He knew the medical argument was gone, so he retreated to his last line of defense. The paper trail, or rather the lack of one. I watched a flicker of confidence return to his eyes. He remembered the day he stormed into my house with Courtney. He remembered seeing the blue-bound contract on the coffee table. He remembered swiping it when I went to the window to watch the tow truck. He had told me later with a smug grin that he had fed it to a shredder. He believed that without that physical piece of paper with the wet ink signature, the loan was just my word against his. Your Honor. Bradley stammered, his voice rising in pitch. The doctor may have lied, but that does not change the financial facts. There is no contract. My father is imagining a loan agreement. If he claims I signed something, let him produce the original. But he cannot because it does not exist. It was a gift. Marcus Stone, the lawyer, nodded vigorously. He thought he had found a loophole. He demanded that the case be dismissed for lack of physical evidence. He gestured to the empty evidence table as if it proved his point. I looked at Mitchell Ross. We had been waiting for this moment. I gave him a small nod. Mitchell stood up and walked to the center of the room. He did not look worried. He looked like a professor about to teach a very simple lesson to a very slow student. Your Honor, Mitchell said, the plaintiff is operating under an outdated understanding of how modern business is conducted. He believes that a contract is a piece of paper that can be stolen or shredded. But Douglas Sterling built a logistics empire by embracing technology. Mitchell tapped his tablet. The large screen on the wall changed again. It did not show a scanned PDF. It showed a complex string of alphanumeric characters followed by a clean digital document. On November 24th of last year, Mitchell explained, when Bradley Sterling signed the loan agreement, he did not just sign a piece of paper. He signed a digital smart contract on a tablet. That signature was encrypted. It was time-stamped. And most importantly, it was uploaded to the Ethereum blockchain. The jury looked confused, so Mitchell simplified it. Ladies and gentlemen, the blockchain is an immutable ledger. Once a record is entered, it cannot be changed. It cannot be deleted. And it certainly cannot be shredded. What you are seeing on the screen is the permanent, unalterable proof of the debt. It shows the amount. It shows the interest rate. And right there at the bottom is Bradley Sterling's verified digital signature. I watched Bradley. He was staring at the screen with his mouth open. He had no idea what a blockchain was. He was a man who thought he could erase his debts by destroying a photocopy he found on a coffee table. He realized in that moment that I had let him steal that paper. I had let him think he was safe. "That is not real," Bradley shouted, pointing a shaking finger at the screen. "That is computer magic. He made it up." The judge leaned forward. "Mr. Sterling, this court recognizes blockchain authentication as admissible and binding evidence. You cannot shred a digital block, son." The reality crashed down on Bradley. The $340,000 debt was not just real, it was indestructible. He was not fighting a senile old man. He was fighting a permanent record that would follow him for the rest of his life. He collapsed back into his chair. The shredder had not saved him. It had only bought him a few days of false hope before the digital truth came to collect. Judge Harrison did not hesitate. He looked over the rim of his glasses at the defense table where Bradley and Courtney were sitting. The air in the courtroom was so still you could hear the hum of the air conditioning vents. The evidence was overwhelming. The fake medical report, the video of them mocking me, the bank records showing the gambling debts, and finally the blockchain contract that proved Bradley was a liar. The judge cleared his throat and began to read the verdict. He found in favor of the plaintiff, Douglas Sterling, on all counts. He ordered the immediate repayment of the $340,000 loan. He added the 15% default interest, which had accrued to over $50,000. He ordered Bradley to pay for my legal fees. And then he added punitive damages for the attempted fraud and emotional distress. All told, the judgment was nearly $500,000. I felt a weight lift off my chest. It was vindication. It was the law acknowledging that I was not a senile old man, but a father who had been wronged. Mitchell Ross squeezed my shoulder. We had done it. Done. We had climbed the mountain of lies and planted the flag of truth at the summit. But then I saw it. The smile. Bradley was not crying anymore. He was not shaking. As the judge finished reading the final total, Bradley leaned back in his chair and crossed his arms. A slow, arrogant smirk spread across his face. It was the look of a man who knows a secret that changes the game. He stood up before the judge could dismiss the court. "Your Honor," Bradley said, his voice steady and almost cheerful. "I accept the ruling. My father has won. He played a great game." Judge Harrison frowned. "This is not a game, Mr. Sterling. You have 30 days to arrange payment." Bradley chuckled. He actually laughed in the face of the Superior Court judge. "That is going to be a problem, Your Honor. You see, you can order me to pay $500,000. You can order me to pay $500 million. It makes no difference." He turned to look at me. His eyes were cold and dead. "I am bankrupt, Dad." The word hung in the air. "I filed for Chapter 7, protection, at 8 o'clock this morning," Bradley announced. "My assets are zero. The law firm has no cash. The condo is underwater. The Porsche is already gone. I have $11 in my checking account." He spread his hands wide like a magician, showing he had nothing up his sleeves. "You can't get blood from a stone," he said. "You spent all this money on fancy lawyers. You dragged us through the mud. You ruined my reputation. And for what? A piece of paper that says I owe you money I do not have." Courtney looked up at him, surprised at first, and then she smiled too. She realized the strategy. If they had nothing, then I could take nothing. They were willing to burn their own lives to the ground just to make sure I stood in the ashes with them. Bradley walked over to the plaintiff table. He leaned in close to me, ignoring the bailiff who was stepping forward. "Enjoy your victory, Dad," Bradley whispered. "Frame the judgment and put it on your wall. It is the most expensive wallpaper you will ever buy. You stripped me of everything, so now I am free. I don't have to pay you a dime. The debts are discharged." He buttoned his jacket and turned to walk away. He thought he had played the ultimate trump card. He thought bankruptcy was a shield that would protect him from the consequences of his actions. He walked out of the courtroom with a bounce in his step, believing he had outsmarted the old man one last time. I watched him go. I did not get angry. I simply looked at Mitchell and opened the thick file folder we had kept in reserve. Bradley thought the game was over. He did not realize that bankruptcy fraud is a federal crime. And he certainly did not know that I knew about the hidden offshore account in the Cayman Islands. Bradley stopped with his hand on the wooden swinging gate. He turned around slowly, expecting to see a defeated old man slumped in his chair. He expected me to be raging against the unfairness of the bankruptcy system. But I was standing up. I was standing tall. And for the first time in months, I was smiling. It was not a happy smile. It was the smile of a wolf that has just watched the sheep walk into the trap. "I know you do not have cash, Bradley," I said. My voice was calm, but it carried to the back of the room. "I know exactly what is in your bank account, down to the last cent. But you are making a fundamental mistake. You think I filed this lawsuit because I wanted the money back." I walked out from behind the plaintiff table. I stood in the center of the well, directly between my son and his freedom. "I do not need your cash," I said. "I have plenty of my own." Mitchell Ross reached into his briefcase and pulled out a stack of documents bound in red tape. He handed them to me. I held them up for Bradley to see. "You see, son, when you stopped paying your mortgage 6 months ago, the bank got nervous. When the Wentworths stopped paying their gambling debts, the casinos got aggressive. Banks and casinos do not like chasing bad debt. It is messy. It is expensive. So they sell that debt to collection agencies and investment funds for pennies on the dollar." I took a step closer to him. 3 months ago, I established a new company called DS Distressed Assets. Its sole purpose was to acquire high-risk liabilities. And guess what we bought? Bradley stared at the red folder. His arrogance was evaporating like mist in the sun. "We bought the note on your condo, Bradley. We bought the mortgage on the Wentworth estate. We bought the promissory notes from the Lucky 7 casino." Courtney let out a strangled cry. She grabbed Bradley's arm, digging her nails into his suit. "That means I am not just a judgment creditor anymore," I continued. "I am your bank. I am your landlord. I am the man who holds the deed to the roof over your head and the roof over your parents' heads." I tossed the red folder onto the defense table. It landed with a heavy thud. "Bankruptcy protects you from unsecured debts like credit cards," I said. "It does not protect you from secured debt. And since you have not made a mortgage payment to me in 90 days, I am officially declaring you in default." I looked at the judge. "Your Honor, since the defendant has admitted on the record that he is insolvent and cannot pay his debts, I would like to exercise my right as the primary lien holder. I am initiating immediate foreclosure proceedings on the property at 15 Beacon Street and the Wentworth residence in Weston." I looked back at Bradley. He looked like he was going to be sick. He realized the trap had snapped shut. He had declared bankruptcy to save his skin, but in doing so he had admitted he could not pay the mortgage. He had handed me the legal justification to take everything. "I own the walls you sleep behind," I said softly. "I own the ground you walk on. You wanted to cut me out of your life. Well, congratulations. You are now living in my world. And in my world, tenants who do not pay get evicted." I turned to Mitchell. "Let us go," I said. "We have an eviction crew to schedule for tomorrow morning." I walked past my son. He did not move. He stood there frozen, a bankrupt man who had just realized that his father was not the victim. I was the architect of his ruin. The courtroom air felt thin, as if all the oxygen had been sucked out by the magnitude of my revelation. I watched the realization wash over Bradley and Courtney. It was a slow, terrifying wave. They looked at the red folder on the table as if it were a bomb that had just stopped ticking and started detonating. I turned my back to the judge for a moment and faced my family. My voice was steady, devoid of the anger that had fueled me for weeks. This was no longer about emotion. This was about logistics. And in logistics, when a route is dead, you close it. As the sole secured creditor of the Sterling and Wentworth estates, I said, my voice echoing off the marble walls, I am exercising my right to protect my investment. I looked at Courtney. She was clutching her stomach, her face a mask of pure horror. She knew what was coming before I said it. Courtney, I continued, you were very concerned about the aesthetic of your wedding photos. You were worried that a man in a cheap suit would ruin the look of your life. Well, you do not have to worry about appearances anymore. I took a step closer. I have instructed the sheriff department to serve the eviction notices immediately, I said. I am foreclosing on the Weston estate. Your parents have been living in a museum they cannot afford for 10 years. That ends today. The bank was too polite to kick them out. I am not. Courtney let out a sob. You cannot do that, she screamed. My mother is sick. You cannot throw them on the street. I looked at her coldly. Your father gambled away his mortgage payments, Courtney. He chose the casino over his home. That is not my fault. That is a choice. And as for your condo in Beacon Hill, the one you furnished with my money, that is also being seized. Bradley finally found his voice. It was a weak, pathetic sound. Dad, please. Where are we supposed to go? We have no money. We have a baby coming. You cannot make us homeless. I looked at my son. I thought about the night at the Ritz-Carlton. I thought about the curtain he pulled to hide me. I thought about the fake medical report. I am not making you homeless, Bradley, I said. I am giving you the independence you claimed you wanted. You said you didn't need my help. You said you didn't need my money. So now you have neither. I checked my watch. It was a reflex from 40 years of running a tight schedule. It is currently 10:30 in the morning, I announced. The eviction crews are scheduled for 10:30 tomorrow. That gives you exactly 24 hours. I held up one finger. 24 hours to pack your clothes. 24 hours to take your personal items. Do not touch the furniture. Do not touch the art. Do not touch the electronics. Those are assets of the DS Distressed Assets Fund. If you take so much as a silver spoon, I will have you arrested for theft. I turned back to the judge. Your Honor, I have the writs of possession here ready for your signature. Since the defendants have declared bankruptcy, they have no legal standing to contest the foreclosure. The property belongs to me. Judge Harrison looked at the paperwork. He looked at the broken couple huddling at the defense table. He picked up his pen. It appears everything is in order, Mr. Sterling, the judge said. The court grants the immediate possession of the collateral. The gavel banged down. It sounded like a gunshot. I picked up my briefcase. I did not look back at my son. I did not look back at the daughter-in-law who had slandered me on the internet. They were just tenants who had violated their lease. I walked down the center aisle, my footsteps loud and rhythmic. Behind me, I heard Courtney screaming at Bradley. I heard the sound of a marriage collapsing under the weight of reality. You have 24 hours, I said over my shoulder without breaking stride. The clock starts now. The sun rose over the wealthy suburb of Weston, but it brought no warmth to the occupants of the sprawling estate at the end of the lane. It was 10:30 in the morning exactly. I sat in my truck parked across the street, watching the deadline arrive. I was not alone. 2 sheriff department cruisers were parked in the circular driveway, their blue lights flashing silently against the manicured hedges. It was a scene that usually happened in bad neighborhoods, but today it was happening on the most expensive street in the county. The front door opened, and Richard Wentworth emerged. The man who had sneered at my suit during Thanksgiving was now wearing stained sweatpants and a tattered sweater. He was carrying a cardboard box that looked too heavy for him. He stumbled on the stone steps. A deputy standing nearby did not offer to help. He simply pointed toward the street. Richard looked defeated. His posture was gone. His arrogance was gone. He looked like exactly what he was, a gambler who had finally run out of chips. Barbara followed him. She was clutching a large jewelry box to her chest. The asset recovery agent, a stern woman I had hired specifically for this task, stepped in front of her. "I am sorry, Mrs. Wentworth," the agent said firmly. "That box is listed as part of the seized assets. It stays in the house." Barbara shrieked. "These are my grandmother's pearls," she cried. "You cannot take them." The agent did not blink. "The appraisal shows they were used as collateral for a loan modification 3 years ago. Hand them over." I watched as Barbara, trembling with rage and humiliation, handed over the box. She walked down the driveway, empty-handed, joining her husband on the curb. They stood there next to a pile of garbage bags filled with clothes. The neighbors were watching from their windows. The curtains twitched. The Wentworths, who had spent a lifetime judging others, were now the main attraction of the neighborhood gossip mill. I put the truck in gear and drove toward the city. I had one more stop to make. When I arrived at the Beacon Hill condo, the scene was even more pathetic. Bradley and Courtney were standing on the sidewalk. They did not have movers. They could not afford them. They had 2 suitcases each. That was it. 3 years of marriage and hundreds of thousands of dollars spent, and it all fit into 4 bags. Courtney was sitting on one of the suitcases. She was not looking at her phone. She was not posting stories for her followers. She was staring at the ground, her face swollen from crying. The aesthetic she cared so much about was destroyed. There was no filter that could make an eviction look glamorous. Bradley was pacing back and forth. He looked up when he saw my truck. For a second, I saw a flash of the old entitlement in his eyes. He took a step toward me, perhaps thinking he could beg one last time. But then he saw the eviction notice taped to the glass door of the building. He saw the locks being changed by a locksmith I had paid for. He stopped. He realized that the man in the truck was not his father anymore. I was the landlord, and he was just a trespasser. A yellow taxi pulled up to the curb. It was not a limousine. It was not an Uber Black. It was a beat-up sedan with a dent in the fender. The driver popped the trunk and Bradley began to load their bags. He struggled with the weight. He looked soft. He looked weak. I rolled down my window just an inch. I wanted to hear the sound of the trunk closing. Slam. It was a final sound. The sound of a door closing on a life they had not earned. They got into the back seat. They did not look back at the luxury building. They did not look back at me. The taxi pulled away into the traffic, merging with the millions of other people who have to work for a living. I watched them disappear around the corner. The house was empty. The debt was settled. The lesson was taught. The taxi ride to the motel on the outskirts of the city must have been the longest 40 minutes of Bradley's life. I was not there to see it, but I did not need to be. I knew the players, and I knew the game. When you strip away the money and the status, a transactional relationship has nothing left to hold it together. The glue was cash, and I had dissolved it. According to the report my private investigator sent me an hour later, the explosion happened right in the parking lot of the Starlight Motel. It is a place where people go when they want to disappear or when they have nowhere else to fall. The neon sign flickers and the air smells of diesel fumes from the highway. Courtney got out of the taxi and looked at the peeling paint on the motel room door. She looked at the dirty asphalt. And then she turned on my son. She did not offer him comfort. She did not tell him they would get through this together. She opened her mouth and let all the venom she had been holding back spill out. "You are useless, Bradley," she screamed. Her voice echoed off the concrete walls. "You told me you had this handled. You told me your father was a senile old fool who would sign over the checkbook. But he played you like a fiddle. You are not a man. You are a joke." Bradley tried to grab her hand. "Courtney, please," he begged. "We can figure this out. I can get a job at another firm. We can start over." She slapped his hand away. "Another firm," she laughed. "Are you delusional? You are a bankrupt lawyer who just committed perjury in open court. No firm in this city will touch you. You are radioactive." A black SUV pulled into the lot. Courtney had not planned on staying at the motel. She had called a friend from her old life, someone who still had a guest room and a functioning credit card. She grabbed her 2 suitcases. "Where are you going?" Bradley asked, panic rising in his voice. "You cannot leave me here. We are married. We are having a baby." Courtney stopped. She looked at him with eyes that were completely void of love. "I am going somewhere with room service," she said. "And as for the baby, do not worry. My lawyers will be in touch about custody. Although considering you cannot even afford this motel room, I doubt the judge will let you within 50 feet of him." She got into the SUV and slammed the door. She did not look back. She left him standing alone in the parking lot of a cheap motel holding a suitcase that contained the last shreds of his dignity. Bradley walked into the room. It smelled of stale smoke and despair. He sat on the edge of the sagging mattress. His phone buzzed in his pocket. He probably thought it was me calling to gloat, or maybe Courtney calling to say she was sorry. It was neither. It was an email from the Massachusetts State Bar Association. I had sent the transcript of the trial to the ethics committee the moment we left the courthouse. The subject line was purely administrative. Notice of immediate interim suspension. Bradley opened the email. It informed him that due to his admission of fraud, his involvement in falsifying medical records, and his bankruptcy filing his license to practice law, was suspended indefinitely pending a disbarment hearing. The career he had built to impress people he did not like was over. He was not just broke, he was unemployable. He dropped the phone on the carpet. He put his head in his hands. The silence in the room was absolute. There was no applause. There were no toasts. There was just the sound of a man realizing that when you build a life on lies, the truth does not just hurt, it eviscerates. He was alone. And for the first time in his life, there was no one coming to bail him out. The office was quiet, but for the first time in months, it did not feel empty. It felt ready. I sat at my desk looking at the document in front of me. It was my last will and testament. The previous version had left everything to Bradley Sterling. I picked up my pen and drew a thick black line through his name. It was not an act of anger. It was an act of correction. I was not erasing my son, I was protecting what I had built from someone who had proven he would burn it down for warmth. Mitchell Ross sat across from me holding a new file. Inside was the background check I had requested on a young man named Liam Carter. "You remember him, Mitchell?" I asked, pointing to the photo of a 20-year-old kid with messy hair and a grease-stained shirt. Mitchell nodded. "The kid from the highway. The one who stopped when your tire blew out in the rain." I leaned back in my chair, closing my eyes. It was 3 months ago, before the lawsuit, before the chaos. I was stranded on the side of the interstate at night. Dozens of cars flew past me, splashing mud on my suit. Then an old beat-up sedan pulled over. Liam did not know I was the CEO of Sterling Logistics. He did not know I was worth millions. He just saw an old man struggling with a lug nut. He changed the tire in the pouring rain, and when I offered him a $100 bill, he shook his head. He told me his grandfather taught him that you do not charge for kindness. That moment stayed with me. While my own son was plotting to declare me incompetent to steal my money, a stranger was getting his hands dirty to keep me safe. "Bring him in," I told Mitchell. Liam walked into my office 10 minutes later. He looked terrified. He was wearing a shirt that had been ironed, but was clearly frayed at the collar. He was a student at the local technical college studying mechanical engineering by day and working as a dishwasher by night. He thought he was in trouble. He thought maybe he had done something wrong. "Sit down, son," I said, pointing to the leather chair that Bradley used to slouch in. Liam sat on the edge of the seat. "Mr. Sterling," he stammered, "I didn't know who you were that night. If I did something wrong, please tell me." "You did nothing wrong," I said. "You did everything right." I slid the paperwork across the desk. It was not a check. It was a scholarship offer. The Sterling Foundation was going to pay for his entire tuition, books, housing, everything. But there was a second document underneath. It was an employment contract. "I do not want to just give you money, Liam," I said, looking him in the eye. "I want to give you a future. I need someone who understands that value comes from work, not from inheritance. I want you to come work for me. You start in the warehouse. You learn the business from the ground up. If you work hard, if you show me the same character you showed on the side of the road, then one day all of this could be yours to manage." Liam looked at the papers. His hands were shaking. He started to cry silently. He told me he was about to drop out because he could not afford the next semester. He told me he had no family. "You have family now," I said softly. I watched him sign the papers. I was not replacing my son. You cannot replace a child. But I was choosing a successor. Bradley believed he was entitled to the throne because of his blood. Liam would earn it through his sweat. I looked out the window at the fleet of trucks below. My legacy was not dead. It was just starting a new chapter. And this time it was in good hands. It is exactly 365 days since the worst dinner of my life. I am sitting at the head of the same long oak table where Richard Wentworth used to sneer at my tie. But the room feels different now. The heavy velvet curtains that blocked out the world are gone, replaced by light linen that lets the sun pour in. The silence of judgment is replaced by the noise of life. The clinking of silverware and the sound of genuine laughter bounce off the walls that used to hold secrets. I did not sell the Weston estate. I realized that selling it would just put money in my pocket, and I have enough money. Instead, I turned it into the Margaret Sterling Center for Community Outreach. The bedrooms where Barbara hid her jewelry are now temporary housing for single mothers getting back on their feet. The gambling den in the basement is now a computer lab where Liam teaches coding classes on weekends. The house that was built on pride is finally standing on a foundation of purpose. There are 30 people at the table today. Not a single one of them is wearing a designer suit. To my right is Liam looking confident in a clean button-down shirt. He has been working in logistics for 6 months, and he already knows the routes better than some of my 10-year veterans. To my left is Maria, the head of the kitchen staff, who insists on serving me the first slice of turkey, even though I told her I am just a guest here. I look down at the table setting. The silver is still the Wentworth silver. I saw no reason to buy new forks when these worked perfectly fine. But the conversation is different. Last year, the air was thick with expectation and greed. Everyone wanted to know what I could give them. Everyone was calculating my net worth while eating my food. Today, the air is filled with gratitude. Nobody here is asking for a loan. They are just asking for the cranberry sauce. Liam taps his glass with a spoon. The room goes quiet. They look at me. Not with fear, not with calculation, but with genuine respect. I stand up. My knees do not hurt today. I feel lighter than I have in decades. I raise my glass of apple cider. I look around the room at the faces of the people I have helped and the people who have helped me. A wise man once told me that family is not about whose blood runs in your veins, I say, looking directly at Liam. It is about who bleeds for you when you are hurt. It is about who stands by the road in the rain when everyone else drives by. Last year, I sat at a table full of relatives and felt completely alone. Today, I sit in a room full of strangers and I feel completely at home. To new beginnings. To new beginnings, the room echoes back. We eat, we laugh. I watch the snow fall outside the big bay window. I think about Bradley for a fleeting second. I wonder if he is eating turkey today. I hope he is. I hope he is learning that hunger makes the food taste better. But I do not let the thought linger. I have a company to run. I have a legacy to build. And for the first time in a long time, I have a family that actually likes the turkey. The house is full. And my heart is finally full too. The wind cut through the thin nylon of the delivery uniform like a razor blade. It was a bitter December night in Weston, and the snow was falling in thick, wet sheets that clung to eyelashes and froze on contact. Bradley adjusted the heavy cardboard box in his arms. His back ached. His feet were numb in boots that were 2 sizes too cheap for this weather. The GPS on his phone told him he had arrived at his destination, but he did not need the map. He knew this driveway better than the lines on his own weathered hands. He walked up the winding path that led to the main entrance. He remembered driving his Porsche up this asphalt, honking the horn for the gate to open. He remembered feeling like a king entering his castle. Now he was just a courier ID number 492, making a drop-off for minimum wage plus tips. He reached the front porch. He was about to ring the bell when he stopped. The heavy velvet curtains that his mother-in-law had loved so much were gone. The windows were bare, allowing the golden light from inside to spill out onto the snowy lawn. Bradley stepped closer to the glass. He felt like a ghost haunting his own life. Inside the dining room was full. The fireplace was roaring, casting a warm glow on the faces of 30 people. He saw strangers eating off the silver plates he had tried to pawn. He saw people laughing. And at the head of the table he saw him. Douglas Sterling looked 10 years younger. He was standing up, raising a glass in a toast. His face was flushed with happiness. He was not the confused, lonely old man Bradley had described in court. He was a patriarch. He was alive. And sitting right next to him in the chair that used to be Bradley's was the kid, Liam, the mechanic. He was wearing a clean shirt, and he was looking at Douglas with an expression that Bradley had never been able to fake. It was admiration. It was love. Douglas put a hand on Liam's shoulder and squeezed it. It was a gesture of pride that Bradley had spent 40 years chasing, but had never stopped running long enough to catch. Bradley looked down at the package in his hands. It was just a box of office supplies. He placed it gently on the doormat. He did not ring the bell. He did not want to disturb the peace he had tried so hard to destroy. He realized then that he could knock on that door. He could cry. He could beg. But he would never be allowed back in. Not because of the lawsuit and not because of the money, but because he had broken the only rule that mattered. He stepped back off the porch and into the shadows. The cold bit at his nose, but he welcomed it. It felt real. It felt like the only thing he deserved. He looked one last time at the window. He saw a family in there, a real family. And he finally understood the lesson that had cost him his inheritance, his reputation, and his name. He pulled his cap down low over his eyes to hide the tears that were starting to freeze on his cheeks. He turned his back on the warmth and began the long walk down the driveway toward the dark road. He understood now that DNA is just biology. It is a biological accident, but loyalty is a choice. Respect is a currency, and family is not built by the blood you share, but by the honor you show. The wind howled around him, erasing his footprints as soon as he made them, leaving no trace that he had ever been there at all. This story serves as a powerful reminder that inheritance is not a birthright. It is a trust that must be earned. Bradley believed that DNA was a golden ticket that allowed him to bypass basic human decency, but he learned too late that integrity is the only currency that matters in the long run. While blood connects us biologically, it is respect, kindness, and loyalty that truly define a family. Douglas proved that you can always start over and find people who truly value you. Never take the people who love you for granted, because once that trust is broken, no amount of money can buy it back. If you enjoyed this story of justice and karma, please hit the like button and subscribe to our channel for more, and let us know in the comments below if you think Douglas made the right choice.